Welcome to this explainer. A lot of people mistake the book of Numbers for this dry, dusty administrative text, just packed with endless genealogies. The name itself comes from two ancient censuses, which, let's be honest, doesn't exactly sound thrilling at first glance. But believe me, the math is just the backdrop here. What we're actually diving into is an epic, highly cinematic journey of human rebellion and divine discipline. It's a profound, high-stakes story of a newly freed people desperately trying to figure out how to survive and hopefully thrive with the holy presence of God dwelling right in the middle of their camp.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty provocative question. Why did an entire generation of Israelites have to die wandering in a barren desert? The answer to that question is literally the heartbeat of the book of Numbers. It's a tragic story about the devastating real-world consequences of fear and rebellion. But at the exact same time, it is an absolute masterclass in God's unwavering faithfulness to His promises even when His people completely and repeatedly fail to trust Him.
Part 1. Mount Sinai, the perfection of God's order.
To understand the sheer chaos that's about to unfold, we first have to look at the perfect order established right where the book opens. The Israelites have been freed from slavery in Egypt. God has made a covenant with them, and they've been camping out at the base of Mount Sinai for about a year. God commands a census, and we land on a staggering figure, over 600,000. And keep in mind, that number represents only the men aged 20 and older who are eligible for the army. Add in the women, children, and the elderly, and we are talking about millions of people camping out in a wasteland. The logistics are just mind-boggling. They aren't just wandering aimlessly. This is a massive, organized nation preparing for a divine military mission to inherit the promised land.
And God's organization of this massive group was incredibly intentional. Just picture this layout. Right at the absolute center of the camp is the tabernacle, the physical dwelling place of God. Surrounding it, in this inner ring, are the priests and the Levites. Their sacred job is to care for this holy tent. Then, arranged perfectly around them in a vast outer ring, are the 12 tribes of Israel. It's like a giant bullseye. This intense physical structure is a profound symbol. God's holy presence was the very heart of their existence, and absolutely everything else revolved around that reality.
Now think of this timeline as our roadmap for today. The entire journey is structured around 3 distinct geographical stages. We start out by leaving the pristine order of Mount Sinai, head deep into the treacherous wilderness of Paran, and finally, after a whole lot of hardship, we arrive at the plains of Moab, sitting just across the river from the Promised Land.
Which brings us to Part 2, the wilderness of Paran, descent into chaos.
So the cloud of God's presence lifts. It's the signal to move, and the Israelites leave Mount Sinai. They've been given a perfect structure, purity laws, a clear guide. They are ready to march. But almost instantly, that beautiful order we just looked at completely shatters into a chaotic, complaining mess. As soon as the journey gets physically demanding, the people totally forget their miraculous deliverance from slavery. They actually begin to romanticize their past in Egypt, craving the comforts of their old, enslaved world, rather than trusting the God who literally just rescued them.
And wow, the munis escalate with terrifying speed. First, it's just general grumblings about hunger and thirst. But then, the poison reaches the very top of the leadership chain. Moses' own siblings, Miriam and Aaron, publicly challenge his authority. Next up is a full-blown organized coup led by a guy named Korah and 250 influential leaders. God's response to Korah is swift and honestly pretty cinematic. The earth literally splits open and swallows the rebels alive. But unbelievably, the complaining still continues, eventually resulting in a deadly judgment of venomous, fiery serpents moving through the camp. It is just a rapid downward spiral.
When they finally reach the edge of the promised land, we see this devastating contrast between crippling fear and bold faith. God tells Moses to send 12 spies, one from each tribe, into Canaan. They scout for 40 days. Now, they all agree the land is beautiful and fertile, but 10 of those spies basically whip the camp into a terrified frenzy. They look at the current inhabitants and see giants living in impenetrable fortresses. But 2 spies, Caleb.
Tragically, the people side with the fearful 10. This catastrophic rebellion completely shatters their trust in God. They actually start planning a full-blown mutiny right then and there. The plan? Strip Moses of his leadership, appoint a completely new captain, and march millions of people all the way back to chains and slavery in Egypt. It's the ultimate, heartbreaking rejection of God's rescue plan.
And because they flat out refuse to trust God, God gives them exactly what they asked for. They will not enter the land. The crucial point here is this number 40.
For every day the spies scouted the land, the nation will spend a year wandering in the wilderness. 40 days becomes 40 devastating years of wandering. They're sentenced to live in the desert until that entire fearful, faithless generation passes away. Only Caleb, Joshua, and the children of Israel will be permitted to finally cross over.
Then we get this incredibly tragic twist. Even their great leader Moses oversteps his bounds. Later on in the journey, the people are bitterly complaining about water again. God explicitly tells Moses to speak to a rock to bring forth water. But Moses, who is exhausted, furious, and intensely frustrated with decades of dealing with these rebels, just loses his temper. He takes his staff and forcefully strikes the rock twice, essentially putting himself in God's place as the ultimate provider. Because he dishonors God's holiness in front of everyone, Moses suffers the exact same fate as the wilderness generation. He'll die in the desert and never step foot into the promised land.
But right in the middle of all this strict discipline, God's mercy still shines through in some really surprising ways. Remember those fiery serpents I mentioned a minute ago? When the people finally repent of their complaining, God tells Moses to craft a bronze snake and lift it high up on a pole. This bizarre but wonderful symbol proves that even God's justice can be miraculously transformed into a source of life. Anyone who was bitten simply had to look up at this bronze serpent in faith, and they were completely healed.
This brings us to part 3, the plains of Moab, unseen blessings.
We've arrived at the final geographical stage of our explainer. The Israelites have survived the wilderness and are sitting right on the doorstep of the promised land. And I absolutely love this contrast. Picture it like a cinematic split screen. Down in the valley, the Israelites are doing what they seem to do best, complaining, struggling, and messing up. But high up on the mountain cliffs overlooking the camp, the king of Moab is terrified by the sheer size of the Israelites. So he hires a pagan sorcerer named Balaam to curse them. While the Israelites are completely failing below, God is actively protecting and blessing them from the cliffs above. He is proving his unshakable faithfulness to his covenant, even when his people are entirely unaware of his grace.
And yes, God actually uses a talking donkey to assert his sovereignty here. It's wild. It's one of the most incredible moments in the text. As the pagan prophet Balaam is traveling to curse Israel, an invisible sword-wielding angel blocks the road. Balaam's donkey sees the angel and stops, and when Balaam furiously beats the animal, God miraculously opens the donkey's mouth to rebuke him. In the end, Balaam opens his mouth to pronounce a dark curse, but God forces him to speak beautiful blessings instead, 3 separate times. He even prophesies about a future Israelite king who will bring God's justice to all nations. It brilliantly illustrates that absolutely no earthly force can thwart God's ultimate plans.
Part 4, a new generation rises. Lessons for today. So, why does all this ancient history matter to us right now? Well, the book of Numbers isn't just a record of ancient failures. It's a deeply relevant mirror for our own human experience. Think about the purpose of the wilderness. The 40 years weren't just some harsh, arbitrary punishment. They were a deeply necessary, 3-step period of spiritual growth. Step 1, the old generation, deeply infected by the slave mentality of Egypt, passes away. Step 2, a new generation is raised up in the harsh wilderness, a people who literally have to learn to be sustained day to day by God's provision. Step 3, a second census is taken. And get this, the numbers are almost identical to the first census 40 years prior. God preserved his people, they're now officially organized, battle-tested, and ready to inherit the land.
And this beautifully connects the ancient text to the modern day, showing us how these dramatic events are direct foreshadowings of Jesus and the New Testament. The bronze serpent is explicitly referenced later in the Gospel of John. Just as the Israelites looked up to the serpent on the pole to be saved from physical death, we look to Jesus on the cross for eternal healing. Even the leadership transition is profoundly prophetic. Joshua, the man who will finally lead them into their earthly rest, shares the exact same name as Jesus in its original language, which literally means, "The Lord is salvation."
So, what are our enduring takeaways here? What do we actually carry forward into our own lives? Well, first, we have to choose to trust in God's promises, even when the obstacles in front of us look like terrifying giants. Second, we really need to recognize the grave spiritual danger of complaining and romanticizing the past, instead of actively practicing gratitude for where we are. Third, we have to understand that times of wilderness and discipline are actually profound opportunities for our own spiritual growth. And finally, perhaps most beautifully, we can rest securely knowing that just like with Balaam on that mountain, God is constantly working in unseen ways to protect and bless us. I'll leave you with this final thought to really chew on. Look closely at your own journey right now. Where are you letting fear keep you from stepping into the promises right in front of you?
And where can you trust in the unseen grace that is protecting you at this very moment? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking the profound truths hidden in these ancient texts.